Somewhere inside a fabrication plant running at full capacity, a purchasing manager opens a license application, writes today's date at the top, and starts counting. 45 days, not a seizure, not a ban, a wait. And that wait is doing something a ban never could, because a semiconductor fabrication schedule has no slack in it. Delay one input by 6 weeks, and you do not delay one wafer. You collapse everything downstream in a cascade that a blunt prohibition would never produce so cleanly. Here's the part that surprised me most when I worked through the structure of these provisions. The lever is not the material. The lever is the calendar. China turned its role as the world's indispensable metals refiner not into a wall, but into a valve. And a valve is infinitely harder to fight than a wall, because a wall gives the other side something to push against. The March 2026 provisions are a scheduling weapon dressed as a trade regulation. This video traces exactly how the mechanism works, who it lands on, why it is almost impossible to retaliate against, and what the 3 strongest counterarguments actually weigh. The law sorted critical minerals into 2 tracks. Tungsten, antimony, and silver moved to a fixed whitelist state trading regime, meaning exports are still permitted, but only through approved state channels. Gallium and germanium moved to a case-by-case licensing regime, with review timelines that industry reports place around 45 days, though no publicly facing regulation has officially codified that figure as of this writing. Nothing in either track is banned. The provisions, read on their face, are an administrative sorting mechanism. That is the point. Imagine a city that does not close its bridges, but requires every truck to stop at a booth and wait for a stamp that takes 6 weeks to issue. Traffic moves, eventually. The city has broken nothing and violated nothing. It has just made the other side's schedule its hostage. The whitelist track and the case-by-case track look like 2 different policy instruments. They are the same instrument set to 2 different speeds. The reason the speed matters is what these materials do inside a chip. Gallium and germanium are substrates and dopants in compound semiconductors and high-speed logic, and no commercially mature substitute exists at scale. Tungsten is the dominant interconnect fill metal in advanced logic nodes, the material that physically connects transistors across the layers of a finished processor. Picture every transistor as a room and tungsten as the door frames. You can design the rooms without tungsten. You cannot build the building. Antimony has roles in specialty, optical, and memory materials, with node-level dependency varying by process. China accounts for the dominant share of global gallium and germanium refining, and a substantial share of tungsten refining, with exact percentages varying across sources, but the directional dominance consistent across every credible estimate I have seen. A leading-edge processor contains interconnect layers dense enough that the tungsten inside a single chip, if somehow unspooled, would stretch across a room. The volume per chip is microscopic. The supply chain behind it is not. The materials are not interchangeable, and they are not stockpilable the way crude oil is. That asymmetry is exactly what the clock exploits. A semiconductor fab does not operate on a rolling commodity buffer. It operates on tightly sequenced procurement cycles tied to tool maintenance windows, yield ramp schedules, and delivery commitments that customers have already signed. A 6-week input delay does not pause one step. It compresses or collapses the schedule that was built around receiving that input on time. Think of it like this. A symphony does not fall apart because the oboe is silenced. It falls apart because the oboe arrives 45 minutes late to a rehearsal, with no room in the calendar to reschedule. What I find striking here is how precisely the law understands the difference between buyers. A 45-day clock is mostly noise for a well-capitalized operation that read the direction of travel 2 years ago and built a substantial inventory buffer. It is a production halt for a lean, just-in-time fab running close to its reorder point. The provisions do not say which is which. They do not need to. A ban would have triggered something specific: emergency stockpiling legislation in the United States, Japan, and the European Union, a declared trade crisis, and a clean escalation ladder. The delay triggers procurement anxiety, internal schedule reviews, and quiet calls to legal teams. Nothing was seized, no contract was demonstrably broken, no shipment was prohibited. And that gap between understood and actionable is precisely where this policy lives. I want to be direct about what I think the law is doing here. Its most important feature is not what it does to supply chains. It is what it denies the other side, the clean escalation trigger that Western retaliatory toolkits were built for. Export controls, tariffs, and investment screens are all instruments designed to respond to bans, technology denials, or market access blockades. None of them map cleanly onto a bureaucratic delay that keeps goods technically flowing. The provisions do not appear to violate World Trade Organization rules on their face, though no dispute ruling has tested that as of this writing. The companies absorbing the delay know exactly what is happening. The governments trying to respond have no clean lever to pull. The asymmetry also runs differently depending on which fabs we are talking about. A chip designer that does not own its own fabrication plants depends on foundries that source materials globally, including from Chinese-dominated supply chains. Those foundries, operating outside China, would be primary recipients of case-by-case gallium and germanium license applications under the new regime. Domestic Chinese fabs buying from domestic refiners through state channels face no license delay under the same provisions. The structural red of the whitelist mechanism makes this clear, though implementation details are not fully public. The asymmetry is not a side effect of the law, it is the design. While a foreign fab files its application and counts days, a domestic competitor does not. The Steelman case deserves full weight. First, stockpiling will blunt this. Companies that read the geopolitical direction correctly have been building strategic reserves of gallium, germanium, and tungsten for years, and a 45-day clock barely registers against a 6-month inventory buffer. That is true and significant for large, well-capitalized operations. Second, substitution and supply diversification are already underway. Canada, Australia, and the European Union have active critical minerals programs explicitly targeting gallium and germanium capacity. The Chinese refining position is not permanent. That is true in direction, but new refining capacity is measured in years to a decade, not quarters. Third, and most honestly, no independent benchmark has confirmed the 45-day figure at scale, and no public evidence yet shows that large numbers of fabs have missed production targets because of it. The clock is set. The visible damage is still mostly prospective. Taken together, the stockpiling and substitution arguments are real. They mean this is not an instant crisis, but they do not diffuse the provisions. They describe how long the fuse is. The disruption is deferred, not dismissed, and the deniability stays intact whether the delay bites today or 18 months from now. The deepest irony in all of this is historical. China's position as a low-cost commodity refiner was treated for decades by Western analysts as a structural vulnerability, a sign that China was stuck in the low-value part of the production chain while others captured the design and systems layers. That analysis was not wrong about the hierarchy. It was wrong about the leverage. Dependence, weaponized slowly and with patience, turns out to be more durable than dominance asserted fast. The constraint of being the world's refiner and not its chip designer did not push China toward rapid self-sufficiency alone. It pushed China toward a quieter tool. The March 2026 provisions are the most elegant trade instrument I have watched deployed in this cycle, not because of what they do, but because of what they avoid doing. No ban, no headline, no clean retaliation target. Just a clock ticking inside someone else's production schedule. The clock the March provision set is still running. No legal challenge has been announced. No fast substitute has emerged for gallium or germanium at commercial scale. The fabs that depend on case-by-case licenses are still filing applications and counting days. The ban everyone was watching for never came. Instead, someone set a clock, and the clock is the ban. The most powerful controls are the ones that never look like controls at all. If you were running procurement at a fab that just had its gallium pipeline put on 45-day review, what does your contingency plan actually look like? And does one exist? Tell me in the comments. If you want to keep tracking how supply chain architecture becomes geopolitical leverage before it becomes a headline, subscribe and turn on notifications. This channel runs those threads to ground.